Welcome to part 4 of our clean architecture with Serverpod and bloc. Okay, we're going to start this lesson by creating one new block for our movie. The good news is we've already done all the work already for the retrieve within our data sources and repositories, and we've even made the use case. So this isn't going to be like twice as much work as what we did in the last video. Actually, I think maybe the last 2 videos. But we are going to make the block for it. So we're going to have a folder inside our presentation layer of movie. We have movie retrieve. So we're going to make 3 new files in here. We're going to have retrieve movie. I'm just going to copy this. Block.dart. Retrieve movie state.dart. And retrieve movie what's the other one? Event.dart. And I realized I spelled block wrong. I've done this many times in the past because, that's kind of how you spell block, but not this kind of block. All right, so let's just kind of open up these side by side. We'll start again with state. We'll look at our movie list state, and let's open up our retrieve movie. And actually, shoot, I realized the naming's not really correct here. This should be movie retrieve, just to keep things consistent. So I'll just copy this and rename these real quickly. Movie retrieve, and rename this one movie retrieve. Done. Okay, so we'll open up our movie retrieve state, and I'm actually just going to copy this. It's going to be very similar. So instead, we'll rename all of these. Anything. In fact, I can probably just do this more or less. So let's just change this to movie retrieve state. And the only difference we now have to make is we still want to have a loading state, we still want a failure state, all that stuff. The main difference is our retrieve state will not include a list of movies. Instead, it will be just a single movie. There we have it. Okay, let's do the same for event. Again, will be pretty similar. I'll put this over here, put this over here. Okay, so we'll just copy this, and it's going to be very similar. Once again, we'll just call this movie retrieve event. And this will be just fetch movie, because we're just getting a single one. So we'll save that. Now I did notice something. I have this as event and events right here. I feel like singular makes sense because that is, what it's called here. So we'll just rename that, and VS Code will be smart enough to replace every import. Okay, so that deals with all that. And then let's just make sure we save everything. And then we'll just open up our state. We'll open up our block. So that's the existing one. And let's open up movie retrieve block here. So with this one, again, it's going to be pretty similar. And in fact, I'm going to, copy this again. And we're just going to rename this to movie retrieve block. But now our use case is actually going to be the retrieve movie use case. And we'll just call this retrieve movie. We could call this whatever we wanted, but we might as well keep our naming good. And then right here, we want to require obviously that being imported. Our movie, instead of movie list state right here, we're actually going to use our movie retrieve state, which we'll have to import. And instead of this, movie retrieve event. There we go. And this, needs to change as well. Retrieve state initial. This needs to change. So, something about block, there's a lot of repetition and boilerplate, but it makes everything very verbose. You get all these errors when something doesn't actually conform, so it's not really a big deal. So this will be fetch movie event, right? Because that's the one here. And we'll call this on fetch movie. And instead of a movie list state emitter, it is actually going to be a movie retrieve state emitter. And instead of a movie list event, we're going to make this retrieve. Okay, so that's pretty good. Then for our result, instead, we are going to be running the retrieve movie. And in this case, we actually do have to pass in params. If we look at this movie retrieve state, we have, I'm looking at the wrong thing. The event, the use case, where's the use case? Here it is, the use case. So we have some params, so the retrieve movie param. So I'm just going to copy that, and we're going to pass that in. So we take movie retrieve params, and we need to figure out how to get the ID here. And we can get that pretty simply just by looking at the event dot. Oh, I forgot. We have to actually pass in ID is going to be event dot ID, which I actually realized we did miss one thing here. If we go to our event, our movie retrieve event, and specifically the fetch movie event, we actually need a parameter here. We need to be able to pass an ID. So what we can do is just go final int ID, and we will then make our constructor, and we will just go required this dot ID. Okay, so we have that now. And as long as, yeah, we're doing this, and on fetch movie, cool, remove, and we want to now take our event ID. Now this is actually this shouldn't be this should be this one right here. Because then our event actually knows it's a fetch movie event, and that way we actually get the autocomplete on this .id. Okay, then we could have two different things happening here. So failure, obviously, now instead of doing movie list failure, we do the retrieve. And for success, we do the same thing. And we'll just, even though this technically works, we want to just call this movie because that's what it is. It's not multiple. Oops. Okay, so that basically wraps up our block. Let's just get rid of some of these imports we no longer need. And we should be good there. Okay, so now that the block is done, we can move to the UI part of the presentation. So we'll make a new page here. And we're going to call this movie detail page .dart. We'll create a stateless widget. And this, because it's a page, we want to have a scaffold for sure. Otherwise, it's going to do a bunch of weird stuff. And, we'll figure out some stuff. I'll just put app bar. We'll have a title with text, movie detail. I'm going to ignore this right now because this will become dynamic at some point. And we'll have a body, maybe with center for now. Child text, hello. Cool. So we have that. Now we have more than one page now. And obviously, we could just do something in our movie list widget that we just do a, navigator of context, push that screen. But for multiple reasons, we should probably be thinking about how we're going to do routing. My go-to these days is Go Router, mostly because it's kind of became an official package that Google sort of took over, and I just I like working with it. It's nice, and there's no. I used to use auto router, and I do like auto router a lot, except it requires code generation and staying away from code generation, especially when we're so close to hopefully to meta and macros. It's just a nice time save. So that being said, we need to install another package, and that is Go Router. So we'll just make sure we get to our Flutter directory. So I need to go back a directory and then into the movie app Flutter and Flutter pub get go_router. And I don't think I'm in the right. I did something wrong. Here. It's because I have, not that much room, so I'm not actually sure what I typed. Let me move this over, and I'll do Flutter pub. Oh yeah, I did get. It should be Flutter pub add Go Router. Silly me. Okay, so now we have Go Router. So we are going to kind of set up our router here, and to do this, we're going to put this in core because it's not really a feature-specific thing. Our routes. And we'll actually just make a, I'm going to make a new folder because we may eventually break this into multiple files when our app gets bigger. We'll call it router. And for now, we're just going to have app router.dart. Okay, so here we're going to just make a class, and we're going to call it app router. And it's going to have a static method on it, or just a static getter, I guess. Static, and it's going to return Go Router. And we're going to call this router. Oops, let's import that first, router. And this is going to be equal to a Go Router. So we're just kind of instantiating this thing here, and we're going to have a couple routes to start. So we will start with simply having our movie list page route. So here, in our first one, we just write Go Route. And our path is just going to be, for now, I'll just make it like, something like that. And we need to give it a builder to tell it what to do when this route is hit. That takes context. and state, which we're not going to make use of in this one, so I can just do an underscore there. And we want this to actually return the movie list page like this. Now, something I like to do with my routes, and this is a pretty common thing, I didn't invent it, is actually on our pages themselves, we create sort of like a static getter, or a static function even. So this is going to be a static, it's going to return a string, and we're going to call it route. And it's ultimately going to be, we'll just do like /movies or something like that. That way, right here, we can just do movie list page dot route. And then in other places when we actually want to navigate to a page, we can just call this, meaning we have it in one spot, we have this place that we could change and not have to like update our code everywhere. So keeping it dry, do not repeat yourself. I'm going to copy this one. And this one, we're going to get our detail page open, movie detail page. And I'm going to do something similar here. So we'll have a static string route. And this is going to return movies / and we'll just do, /ID, which this is just in Go Router how you can do like a placeholder because we want it to kind of, the URL to have a dynamic data in here. So we'll make this movie detail page dot route, and obviously you want to return movie detail page. Now, movie detail page, although we haven't done it yet, we also need to make sure that on our detail page we're passing in an ID, which will come from the route ultimately, but this will be a int. We'll call it, we can call it just movie ID to be really clear what it is. And let's just make that a required field here, this movie ID. And now we're getting this error. And how do we get access to that? Well, although in the first one we don't need state, here we can actually make use of state, and we can do something like state dot, well, first of all, ID is going to be equal to state dot path parameters, and then we want to put in basically ID here. So this just has to map to this essentially. Now we are having a couple errors here. One, this shouldn't be a constant anymore because it's dynamic. Secondly, this should actually be called movie ID. And third, we need to transform this into a parse, or into an int, sorry. So we can go int.parse and wrap this whole thing in it. And lastly, we still have an error because technically this could be null, right? So what we can do is actually just fall back to like an empty 0, a string version of 0, so it gets parsed as 0, and maybe we find a way to handle that. If our code's good though, we shouldn't ever, run into that problem because we won't be passing, something with an ID of 0. Okay, so now we have our two routes. So let's go to our main.dart and right over here, instead of just using a material app, we're going to be using a very special version of material app, and it's called a material app.router. So we can go .router, and now we no longer pass in a home. Instead, what we pass in is a few things about our router config. So we can go router config, and we can actually take our app router class right here and go like this, .router. Let's import this, router. There we go. So let's just do that, and we might need one more thing. I think we might need an initial route. Let me just double check. Yeah, so we want an initial location, and for our purposes now, because we don't have auth or anything yet, we're just going to make our initial location the same as our movie list page. So that's where we'll start. All right, and let's just add some trailing commas here just to make stuff a little bit prettier. We'll do a hard refresh because we made a pretty substantial change, and we will open up our app right here. So although it's hard to tell, like it seems like it's still working. Yeah, it flashed for a second, so I know it rebuilt. So everything's working great. Now what we can do in our movie list widget is actually make an on tap event here. So we can go on tap, and here we can go context.go, and we want to use movie detail page .route. Now there's a bit of a problem here because what would be passed in is essentially if we just did this like this, it would be going here, and that's not what we want. We actually want to be movies / an ID. So what I like to do is in my route, and this is why this is a function and not just a getter, what we actually can do is have, for instance, an int called movie ID, but we make it null. And it's wrapped in optional brackets here. And then what we can do here, I'll just put this on my clipboard, and we'll just do this. We can go we can take the movie ID, but if it's null, go back to this, just in like a string right there. So that means in our router, because we're not actually passing that in when we make when we do our movie ID.route, it's actually just going to use this ID thing, which works for our router. But in our pushing here, now we can actually pass in an ID, and I can go movie.id, and it will now transform it to that. So it's a nice way, yeah, just to kind of work with routing and keep things good. So now context.go, in theory, this should go to movie detail page, and look, it does. Except I don't want to use, sorry, I didn't want to use context.go. I want to use context.push because I want to still be able to navigate back. Go essentially replaces it, which is good in certain use cases, but push will allow us to have this stack that we can actually go between. Okay, great. So now let's just close a whole bunch of things, and let's go to our movie detail page again. And let's do some stuff here to integrate bloc. So first of all, let's make this a stateful widget again, like we did on our list page. And let us get an init state happening. So our init state, what do we want to do? Well, similarly, we want to go context.read. And we want to use, instead of the movie list block, we're using movie retrieve block. And we're going to add an event here, and that event is going to be the fetch movie event. And here we have to pass in an ID, and we have that already, right? We can just go widget, because we're in a stateful widget. We're in a state right now, widget.movieID. And that will actually, send that event. Then down in here, I'm just going to remove everything because, this is going to be a lot different. And we're going to, I'm just going to make like something like text right now, just so I can go like this and wrap with a, we're going to use this time a block consumer. So we've looked at block builder before. We haven't looked at block listener. Block listener, and I'll just do it just to show, is something where instead of actually like changing the UI, you can actually handle events. So you can be listening to things and say, a certain type of event comes through, you could show a toast, or you could navigate back, or you could, send something to your analytics, whatever kind of event, something that's not really UI based. Whereas block builder instead of listener is for like updating the UI itself. Now there's one other that's really helpful, and it's basically called a block consumer. And this has both the listener and builder in. Now you could achieve this just by wrapping a builder with a listener, but then you have a sort of nested mess. Block consumer just allows you to have both of those things in one. And that's what I want to use here. And you'll see why in a bit. So here we need to say what block it is. So it's going to be the movie retrieve block. And then we need to say what the subject state is. And that's movie retrieve state. And here we have our listener. Now the reason we have this listener here is what we can do is we can go if state is movie retrieve state failure. We can actually do something here. For instance, we could show, we could do a snack bar, sort of message, which to do that, we can just go scaffold messenger dot of context dot show snack bar and pass in like a snack bar here. That maybe has like content of text, and we can actually take, the error message, because we know that it's when we're in this thing, we actually within our state, which is this right here, we know that I have a state.message. So we could do that, and we could also do like something like context.pop after, so we could show an error and then pop them out of here, because if you get an error on the detail page, there's not really any use being there. So it's like, let's show them an error and let's get the heck out. So that's what I wanted to show, is what we can do with the listener. Now in our builder, we'll do a similar thing again, where we basically return, and we can return, actually we'll do first the switch statement. So here we can switch state again, and we'll get this nice little helper here where I can actually go and add all the cases, which is super fun. There we go. So for initial, we can do something, but let's actually sort of do these in different order. So let's think loading, and here we would just return a loader. We have that thing we made before, const loader. And then for failure, maybe we return something else. Now, because because this is a screen or a page, we need to make sure that we're actually always returning a scaffold. Now we could wrap this whole thing in a scaffold so that, and just be doing this in the body, but for reasons that will make sense in a minute, we're actually just going to do it here. So actually, let's get rid of this and let's wrap this in a scaffold. So I can just go wrap with widget, scaffold. Now I'll have to change child to body, but it got me a little bit closer, and we can const that. We'll do something similar if it's a failure, except we'll actually, have, it won't be a const this time, and it will have a center with a child of text, and we can use our state.message because it knows it's a failure at this point. For initial, we'll just at first just return a sized box. In theory, this might not even show up for a frame, right? Because as soon as we're initting state, we're already sending the movie fetch event. And remember, anytime an event is sent, we're listening to it in the block. Any type of movie, not just the fetch event, but any kind of movie retrieve event, we're emitting the state loading. So in theory, this will never actually be visible, or if it is, it'll be like one frame and not even noticeable because we'll have the loading progress bar happening next. Okay, now here also, we should probably wrap this in a scaffold or it's going to look kind of funny. Wrap with widget, scaffold. And we'll just const this whole thing and make this a body and get rid of that. Okay, now here, let's just not forget this time. We'll return a scaffold. And what we can do here is in the app bar, we can actually make an app bar and we can make the title of it using state.movie.title, right? And I can also just make this a little bit easier because I want to probably access this a few times. And we can make just something called movie equals state.movie. And then we don't have to keep writing state every time. So we have that. So that's cool for that. But in our body now, maybe we have, a column, has some children in it. And we might have, some text that says, year or released. And let's just do movie.year. Not forget our little $sign there. And similarly, and I'm not going to worry about making this pretty, but I think we had like director name, and then we can also do one that says, I think we had something called, oops, I put that in the wrong spot. That should be there. With the comma. I think it was log line. There we go. And we're just missing something. There we go. Okay, now I do see some kind of error here, and it's because we're not actually returning the block consumer. We need to return that. Otherwise, nothing will work. Okay, so let's just clean everything up. Click save, and let's refresh. And there's probably a mistake still, just saying. Yeah, here we go. I knew it. I knew there'd be something wrong. So the last thing we need to do is in our main.dart, actually, there's two things we need to do. One of them, we need another provider. So we're going to have block provider, service locator, and here we're going to have movie retrieve block. And we actually haven't registered this here yet. So we need to register this right here. We need to register the movie retrieve block. Let's import that. And this now requires not list movies, but it requires the retrieve movie. And here we would use retrieve movie use case, which also reminds me we need to also get the updated use case in here. Repository is already here. The data source is already here. It's just these things. So this one will be our retrieve movie use case, this. And this requires, I believe, actually this is correct still, because it's requiring a movie repository. Yep, we're good. Save everything, refresh, come back to our app. We have our movie. And we go here, and it's not pretty. We should have centered this stuff or whatever, but it is working. We have, this nice little detail thing. Now you'll notice it is actually doing a network request each time we're coming here. There's ways around that. We can, definitely get to that in the future to actually cache responses. But this is pretty great. And, if we had multiple movies, you'd be able to kind of go between them and see stuff. Awesome. So that's all the work I wanted to cover in this lesson, but I think this is a great time before we move on to authentication to do a quick review of everything. Obviously, reviewing this in full would require many hours because it took us many hours to build this, but I kind of want to step through, sort of the structure of our clean architecture again. So let's talk about the structure of our clean architecture. So again, we have a data layer, and we can think of the data layer as the part that is closest to the external resource that we're managing, right? And it is very specifically implemented to work with a specific type of source. And in our case, it is connected with Serverpod. So that's what data is. Domain is not specific to the external stuff, but it's it's a design pattern for our internal use. And then presentation is anything to do with UI, whether it's widgets or pages, but also to do with state management. So that's why we have these 3 different folders in here. Now, if we look at domain, we can see that we have a repository in here. And this is just an abstract interface. So we're not actually writing any implementation code here. We're just saying, hey, these are the things our system is going to support. We're going to allow listing movies, which is using fp-dart to either return a failure if something goes wrong, or when everything goes right, this is what we would get back. Then in the data layer in our repository, we have the movie repository implementation, which is implementing that movie repository there. Get rid of those guys and import this properly. I'm a stickler. And here we are actually writing code that is specific to our use case. Now in the data source, this is actually the data source. This is where we're very closest to Serverpod, because we're actually working with the Serverpod client, and we're doing the code here. We're putting it into try catch, and that's so that we never have to worry about returning null or anything like that, because we're actually going to raise an exception in here when something goes wrong. And that's why in here we also have a try catch, because we can return this right when it goes right, and when there was a server exception we can return left. So it just helps us not have to have nullable use cases. Everything is going to either completely break and fail gracefully because we built it in a way that it will fail gracefully, or it'll work as expected and everything is just nice. We have use cases, which is part of the domain layer, and this talks to the movie repository and basically gets a list. And you remember we created a sort of base use case, which is an abstract interface, which allows us to insert what is the type we should be getting back when there's a success, and what are the types of params that come in. And that's why we can say, okay, use case, when it's a success, list of movies, and there's no parameters, which is just this empty class we made to allow options for no parameters, which is different than our retrieve movie, because our retrieve movie actually has these kind of parameters here, where we need to pass an ID in, because it just requires that in the network request. What ID am I getting? Cool. So that's kind of the use cases there. And then in the presentation side, we have our blocks. If we look at our movie list block, we have state. So these are at any point, our movie list block can be in any of these states, only one of them at a time, but they can quickly move from initial to loading to either success or failure, and potentially back again. And these are just things that are inheriting this sealed class right here. A reminder, sealed class means nothing outside of this file can implement this, which just keeps stuff more tight and clean, and we don't worry about someone doing something in the wrong place. Everything's together. For some of these, when there is actually some additional data that the state will require, for instance, when there's success, we need the list of movies. When there's an error, we need a message saying what the error is. We actually just have them in here. But they're all ultimately using this. Similarly with events, now there's only one event for our list event, but we could eventually have more, like maybe something for filtering, maybe something for ordering or sorting or even searching. But we just are doing it very basic right now. So we have our abstract class for that, and then we inherit it, and here we go. This is used as a type of event. If we look at our block inherits block, which is built into obviously block itself, and we have to tell it, okay, it's what type of event is it, and it's that movie list event, and just the generic one, not specifically this, because it can have multiple. Although in our case right now, we could have used this because we only have one, but this is how you should do it. Use this one. And then what type of state? Similarly, it's going to not be this specific state, because that would make this block useless. It would only be able to be in one state at a time. We want to make it this, because all of these will inherit this, and thus these are part of this. All right, and then we construct it. We say what is the initial state. We also pass in our use cases. There's only one use case, so we pass it in. And we subscribe essentially to anytime a normal list event happens. It could be the fetch, it could be our other ones that again don't exist right now, but could. We want to emit the loading state at the very start of it. But then if, for instance, the fetch movie event happens, we go and we actually talk to our use case, passing in no parameters for this one. And we go on and basically fold on it. This is just in FP Dart. If it was a success, this is emitted. If it's a failure, this is emitted. And everything just reacts nicely. Then in our actual presentation UI, we have our movie list page, which actually is just completely stateless widget. But if we go to our movie list widget, what we're doing is this is a stateful widget only not for the purpose of managing state, but only for the purpose of having an init state, meaning like this has loaded. What we do is we go and we basically say, hey, fetch me the movies. So this event gets sent. Our block essentially goes, hey, I know that event. Cool, I'm going to call this. And then it worked. Oh, I'm going to emit this. So it's going to change from initial very quickly to the loading state, because that happens. Then it's going to return, hopefully, it will resolve to a success state, maybe a failure. But that's kind of the flow of what happens there. And back in our widget here, we essentially are listening for using a block builder, and we're checking the state. So this is movie list state, but there's multiple different options for movie list state. We have initial, we have loading, we have success. And we're just handling these expectedly. And because we're doing this in a switch statement using actually pattern matching, this isn't a traditional switch statement. And if you're on an older version of Dart, this won't work. You will have to do it with like kind of like what we were doing in, I think, on the detail page, where we would actually have to go state is this. But the pattern matching actually allows us to make this a little bit cleaner by using a switch statement. Yeah, we just check if it's initial. We're going to kind of return nothing, just an empty widget. If it's loading, we're going to show a loader, which is our own little custom widget. If you try and type that and it doesn't work, it's because we made this. There we go. If there's a success, and because it's a success, it knows specifically that this state is actually a movie list state success. So it actually gives us access to movies because it's part of the success. It knows it's going to be there. It's a required field. Then we just make a list builder and basically do, what we would normally do, whether we're getting the data from a future builder or anything. We have it, we have the list of movies. Let's do it. Let's loop around it. Let's do it. And then we have a case for failure, right? Where we're just going to show the message. And that's basically it. We did something for the detail page as well to push to it, which essentially is very similar. The main difference is we're using a block consumer so that if something happened, it'll do this. And actually, we haven't tested that. Let's see if that actually works. And we can kind of fake that. We can go to our movie list widget. Instead of doing movie.id, let's actually just pass in a number that I'm pretty sure doesn't exist in our database. And we'll just do a full rebuild. And let's just click this. And we actually see like instance of server exception. Okay, the error message isn't perfect. We probably need, let's actually go to our exception class. Because I think this is the first time I've actually seen an error. So I should be probably doing .string, or .message, but we can actually do a toString override here and just actually return message. So that anywhere that we're just like trying to print out the server exception, it will automatically be the message. So let's just try that again. We actually get movie not found. So that's nice. So kind of tried to go there and then, popped us back and showed us this nice toast. So that's the main difference on the detail page, is that we actually, want to do this. We could, of course, do it on the list page too if we wanted to, but I don't think it's necessary. We're showing an error anyways, and we can't really pop back to anything else because we're already at the start. Phew! All right, that is what I wanted to show in this video. I hope you found it interesting and educational. And next we're going to be getting into the very fun and complicated world of authentication, specifically with Serverpod. So, that's pretty awesome. And I think in terms of Serverpod's perspective and involvement in this project, we're going to see a lot more tight integration with it because they have a very specific way of doing auth. And what we're going to do is conform to it and make everything work. Auth is going to be a lot more complicated than this because right now we only have like a couple use cases. With authentication, we're going to have, logging in, logging out, creating an account, verifying an account, maybe some other things too. So there's a lot more to it, which is why I wanted to do this one first because we've kind of done something a little more simpler. And I won't necessarily have to be like explaining everything I'm doing as in detail because it'll be already familiar to you when we do auth. So see you in the next one. Looking forward to it and catch you soon.